Hello, hello. This is Ice, and we're on Story Elixir. This video is designed to be a companion video to the Persona 5 walkthrough that I'm doing in other videos. What we're doing here is we're going to be analyzing the game in sections as we play it, so you can kind of see how the analysis process changes over time, is structured, how my own thoughts are forming as I play a game, these kinds of things. It's also to give a bit more context to what's going on and to appreciate the amount of work that goes into the crafting of one of these stories by highlighting what they've done in this story. We're only doing up to the prologue today, which means we're looking at the events from the moment I hit play to the moment where the story is shifted to half a year before the events at the very beginning of the game. We're not going to be worried about that next section until after that arc is finished. So the first thing that happens when you hit the play button is a mysterious voice that you don't know what it is as a new player is telling you,
"This story is a work of fiction. Similarities between characters or events to persons living or dead in your world are purely coincidental. Only those who have agreed to the above have the privilege of partaking in this game." The contract has been sealed. The world is not as it should be. It's filled with distortion, and ruin can no longer be avoided. Those who oppose fate and desire change. From time to time, they were referred to as tricksters.
making the player sign a contract is important a little later when we are introduced to our main character. And it's to make sure that the player knows that what's going on is fictional because the game is set mostly in a real world place. It's set in Tokyo, Japan. So it is accomplishing two goals by A, placing us thematically in the story by having us sign a contract with this mysterious voice, while also making sure that the player has acknowledged that this work is fictional. It's a really nice way of doing that. And then we're dropped into the story in medias res. I mentioned this in the actual playthrough and I said how good that was, but in medias res means the middle of things, and it is extremely common in epic poetry and really dramatic storylines because you're dropped into a dramatic section of the story. And this goes back to ancient Greek epic poetry like the Iliad, the Odyssey, and those kind of things. So it's also easily understood. Using in medias res as a prologue is also really smart because prologues by their nature have a couple of guidelines where you're looking at a different point in time. Sometimes it's a different character, although that's not the case here. And also a prologue needs to have a different hook than the more traditional beginning of a story. You don't typically want the prologue hook and chapter 1's hook to be the same. You tend to want them to be different. So dropping us in medias res has a baked in hook because you start to ask questions as the player as, why are we in a casino? What's happening? Who is this person I'm looking at? So on and so forth. Like, we are dropped into the middle of a situation, and so all of the questions inherent into that situation are going to be asked by the player. What are we doing here? And these questions serve as a hook for the story. All of the scenes at the casino also highlight how our main character, the boy with the frizzy hair, how he solves problems. He's acrobatic. For the most part, he dodges first and then attacks. So he tends to favor evasion over, say, rushing towards enemies and attacking them. He's not that way. He also tends to do things with a lot of showmanship. Even a character says,
"You're so reckless, you know that?"
so on some level, he's also kind of a showman. He's kind of a show-off. And that gives us a baseline for who this character is. All of the casino scenes end with us getting captured.
Capture him! Let's go! Go, go, go! Go over there! Just struggling. Suspect secure.
And something that they tell the main character and the player by extension is
You have your teammate to thank for this. You were sold out.
so the player going forward probably also wants to know who betrayed our main character. That's something that we need to figure out throughout the rest of the game. Once we are in, I'm going to assume, a prison, they show us through audio cues, visual cues, obvious scenes that we've been beaten and drugged. I mentioned this also during the playthrough, but having the main character be drugged makes him an unreliable narrator because his mental state is compromised. He's been drugged. This makes sense. And so any inconsistencies in his storytelling as we go forward can be explained by him being drugged. They also introduce us to Sainijima, and the main character can't see this, so this is purely exposition for the player. This is just for the player's benefit, because the character would not be able to see or hear any of this. But they also show that she is in a similar position to where the people around her are not treating her well. Yes, she's not being physically beaten and drugged like our main character is, but at the very least, she's not being treated well by the people around her. So on some level, our main character and Sainijima are being treated the same way, and so have kind of a common ground even at the beginning of their conversation. They also give a couple of lines to suggest that they have met each other before. And what this does is it provides an explanation of why these two characters have a reason to communicate with each other in a respectful way and an honest way. It's a way to tell the player, hey, these two are actually on the same side, even if the two characters don't know they're on the same side, because she is a prosecutor. It's her job to send him to jail. So if those scenes did not exist, it would be weird for her to possibly relate to the main character, possibly, show concern for his well-being, these kind of things. The last important thing that they do is they inject the scene with a sense of urgency. They tell Sainijima that she is not going to be given a lot of time. So all characters involved understand that their time is limited, and so even though she's asking questions and getting answers from him, and we will have plenty of time to play the game as the player, they're having to condense all of the events of the story down to, we're going to assume, about 30 minutes or so. It's going to be quick, it's going to be vague, it's going to be kind of down and dirty. All of the events of the game are going to be condensed down to a small conversation between these two characters. And that's important to remember later on when the two of them are talking together. This kind of framing allows for them to have conversation, maybe between scenes or between major arcs, or to add context to the story as we tell it. It allows for these kinds of things, and it makes sense that they're going to have commentary in this story within a story. And the very last thing that happens is we're introduced to a butterfly. Now, the butterfly in Persona is symbolic of a specific character that is a major player in Persona 1 and Persona 2. He has largely been removed from Persona as a whole, but the butterfly is symbolic of him specifically in Persona. It's also more broadly symbolic because butterflies are universally considered to be symbols of transformation and change because they change from a caterpillar to a butterfly, and that's a pretty drastic change. And in Japan specifically, they also function as psychopomps, which are creatures or beings that guide souls into the afterlife, or are generally symbolic of that cycle of life and death. But the screen fading to black during this conversation is probably intended to say that only the main character can see this butterfly and hear this butterfly. And this butterfly is saying that if you can remember the events of the story accurately, there might be a possibility to get you out of this mess. So that's one more goal that the player has to keep in mind. We have to tell the story well and accurately, and we got to find the traitor. All the while knowing that our narrator here has a limited amount of time before, one, Sainijima needs to go, and two, before those drugs kicked in. So it adds a little bit of stakes to it, even though for the most part, the player will be allowed to tell the story and experience the story at any pace they want. That's all for the prologue. It's very short because most prologues are only there to either contextualize chapter 1 or they are there to introduce a framing device. This one is the latter. We will do something a bit more extensive on the first arc of the game. And if you would like to see more of this, put a like down at the bottom, subscribe if you would like to, and I will be back with more Persona later.